I think we're on the verge of something big over at EPCOT, and I have to be honest with you, it's got me kind of concerned. And of course, I want to chat with you about that today. So, you know the drill. Go grab yourself something delicious to sip on, maybe a snack, get cozy, and let's dig in. Okay, so let's start off by taking a step back, because I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. So it's currently January 2025. It's super rainy out, for those of you who might be wondering. And since it's the start of a new year, we're also kicking off a lot here at the Walt Disney World Resort. And of course, as some of you may already know, that means a lot of construction projects. Now, naturally, we've been talking a lot about this on the channel because it's current events, it's the news. So you may have heard us talking about things like Dino-Rama closing or all of the work that's happening over at Magic Kingdom. We did do a walkthrough of both of these places, by the way, and if you want to check that out, I'll put it in the description down below. You can click the links there. Anyway, there's a lot that we covered in those discussions, sharing information about what the situation currently is and how it might impact your vacations, but the list doesn't stop there. I know I mentioned a few things here and there while we were talking about Animal Kingdom and Magic Kingdom, but it goes beyond that. Orange Garage is currently closed. There's a number of floors that are currently closed in Orange Garage, and that's definitely impacting people who are driving to Disney Springs. We also have work happening at All Star Movies, as well as Caribbean Beach and Yacht and Beach Club. Then there's all the work that's happening over at the Polynesian. And then, of course, over at the Magic Kingdom, the Hall of Presidents is now currently down to be updated following the inauguration here in the United States. But there's also work happening over at EPCOT. Now, I don't know if I made this perfectly clear the other day. Maybe I didn't mention it at all. I can't remember. So I'll just say it now. It makes perfect sense that Disney would opt to do all of this work during this time of year because we're in that in-between slow season. The holidays have wrapped up. Spring break isn't quite here yet. And so things are slow. You got to take advantage of those low crowds in order to get some work done. And with Walt Disney World, it's not like some other places elsewhere in the country where they close down seasonally, they have to get the work done at some point. And so they find the best time to do that. And that's what they're doing right now. And again, to be fair, which I did mention the last time we talked about this, we knew that some of this stuff was going to be happening. It was scheduled, it was announced. The thing that took me by surprise, and I think it took a lot of you guys by surprise as well, is just how much of it was happening all at once. Especially with Disney's recent track record of delayed projects and construction just taking a really long time. It seems like an odd choice to not wrap up projects like the Swiss Family Treehouse, for example, before putting up walls around the next one and presumably gearing up to start that, if not starting that project. It's a weird management style, I would think that they would opt for doing things in a way that's a little bit less invasive to guests while also being less strenuous on the construction crews, but I'm sure they have their reasons. Anyway, outside of everything that was going on at Animal Kingdom and Magic Kingdom and all the other little things that we talked about a second ago, we also noticed that there was some work happening over at EPCOT, most notably at the Seas. Now, this is where I want to focus our attention today, and it's honestly what has me a little bit concerned, but more on that here in a bit. So recently, over in EPCOT at the Seas, we've seen some changes, and they're kind of subtle changes, the type that might fly under the radar of the average guest. One of those changes, and probably the most notable because it's the most obvious, is rehoming some of the dolphins and manatees. So for those of you who might not already be aware, the Seas is a pavilion over at EPCOT, and they have a table service restaurant, they have a playground in there, as well as an attraction. There's actually 2 attractions because there's the Seas with Nemo and Friends, and then there's Turtle Talk with Crush, but there's also an aquarium in there. And it's a great spot. It's nice for kind of pulling off and getting some AC. It's also just really enjoyable. I love it in there, but it's not quite the same anymore because we have seen that the manatees as well as some dolphins have been removed. Now, that's not to say that there aren't a ton of other animals in there to go check out, but it's not quite the same. But back to what's going on in the Seas with the manatees and dolphins. Now, I can't speak to what's going on with the dolphins, but I can tell you that To my understanding, at very least, moving the manatees, rehoming those manatees, is a result of a statewide effort to relocate and reorganize some of the manatees that are in places like the seas around Florida. So this wasn't a decision that Disney made solely on their own, at least, again, not to my best knowledge. But it's also not the only change that Disney is making in the seas. As part of all of this, Disney also announced that they're going to be moving away from long-term residencies when it comes to manatees at the seas, shifting their focus more to critical need short-term residents, which means we can no longer expect to see manatees at the seas on a regular basis. And that ultimately results in empty tanks that have been curtained off, at least right now. But it doesn't really stop there, at one empty tank and one small area being curtained off. The hours for the entire Seas Pavilion have also changed. It no longer stays open with the park, closing, at least to date, at 7 p.m. Now look, this type of thing, it happens from time to time. You know, tanks get emptied out, cleaned, worked on, updated, animals get moved around. But this isn't just about a tank being vacant temporarily. This seems to be a shift in purpose for the seas. And I find that interesting. Why do I find that interesting? Because we've seen this all before. This is a pattern that Disney likes to follow, and it almost always leads to the same place. Completely overhauling or removing an element, land, attraction, or pavilion in one of their parks. So here's how it usually works. For one reason or another, Disney wants to change something, but they can't just do it. They need some sort of justification. And I know what you're thinking, but no. Breathing new life into the parks or doing something interesting and innovative, that's not a good enough reason. They need justification, whether it's to appease guests or the finance department. They need justification, and so they create it. For example, maybe the seas is too expensive to operate. It costs a lot to run an aquarium, financially, operationally. Let's say, again, this is all hypothetical, but, come along with me for a second. Let's say that Disney, who's already seen a drop in attendance throughout 2024 and is expecting to see that throughout 2025, they want to cut some corners. They want to save some money, like any other business would, by the way. This is not something that just Disney does. This is a business thing. So let's say they consider that the seas might be a good place to start. But the seas, especially the aquarium, it's always packed. I mean, it is an indoor area, perfect for escaping the rain or the heat. And there are a lot of little ones who like to take a break from, the experience that is visiting a Disney park nowadays at the seas. It's relaxing, it's calming, it's a nice place to be. And so, of course, you got to imagine that the powers that be, they're not going to be willing to just yank that out and close it for however many years. I mean, especially at EPCOT, there's always this discussion about how there's only so much for kids to do at that park, which, is a conversation we can have some other day. I don't really think that that's necessarily true, but it's neither here nor there. Still, there's no denying, at least not right now, that it's a relatively popular area. But what if it wasn't so popular? What if there was a way to divert traffic to illustrate that there was a need to update this space, to show that guests had a lack of interest and that this was time for something new? Sure, this might seem like a little bit of a conspiracy theory. Don't get me wrong, okay? I know how what I'm saying sounds, but remember how before I said that this was a pattern? It's a pattern that we've actually seen played out right here at Walt Disney World many times before. I mean, think about Grand Avenue over at Hollywood Studios, also known as Muppets Courtyard or Muppets Square. They closed down 2 shops in that area. Didn't really give anyone a reason to be back there. They only put so much effort into the restaurants, and people lost interest. The area became pretty vacant pretty regularly. And then it was announced that it was going to close and make way for Monsters, Inc., Tom Sawyer Island, and the Rivers of America. Pretty much the same thing. Prior to announcing that it was going to close, it wasn't a place that was open all the time. Then there's the quick service location that's on Tom Sawyer's Island, which was only open seasonally. That hasn't been open in a while. Of course, people lost interest. They stopped going. And before long, Disney announced that it would be closing and would be replaced by a Cars attraction and partially by a Villains Land. Dino Land USA? Same thing. They closed a major attraction, didn't replace it with anything but a few benches, maybe some picnic tables later on. Because there was no reason to be back there, the area became pretty vacant. Disney saw that, announced that it would be closing, and replaced with the tropical Americas. And the list goes on, and that's before we even start to touch the things that are kind of in limbo, you know? They're not officially closed down yet, but they're hanging on by a thread. The Imagination Pavilion is a fantastic example of this. It's not really getting the updates that it needs, and certainly not the updates it deserves, and it just continues to limp along. The Morocco Pavilion is another great example. You know that that actually was the home of a table service restaurant and a number of shops that sold Moroccan goods. And let's not forget about the Wonders of Life Pavilion, a place that some of you who are watching today might not even realize exists, but it's still there, rotting, but fully intact between Cosmic Rewind and Mission Space. So why couldn't the seas be next? Now look, as soon as I heard the news about some of these updates happening at the seas, my brain started to chug. And so I started doing some digging because you never know. Sometimes there's information that's out there. It's hiding in plain sight. You just have to look for it, you know? So I started to dig, and this is when things got even more interesting because I stumbled upon a rumor from back in May of 2019. Now this was originally posted by WDWNT. And look, before you say anything, because I know there's always someone who has something to say about WDWNT, I don't want to hear it. WWNT, love them or hate them, they've been right with a number of their rumors in the past. And yeah, they've had some misses. No one's perfect, but they've had some hits. And I think it's interesting. So anyway, they posted this rumor talking about how the reimagining was going to have multiple phases over at EPCOT, you know? So there's going to be phase 1, and then eventually they'd break into phase 2. And part of phase 2, again, a rumor, is that they were going to be removing the seas as well as the land. Now, the suggestion was that we might see these pavilions close at some point between 2024, which is already the past, you know, and 2026, which is like not here yet. So, interesting, right? Anyway, I'll put a link to the article in the description box down below if you want to check that out. You know, you want to peruse and see what they have to say. But I found that this was a very interesting rumor to have made its way out. And of course, you know, a lot has changed since 2019. We've seen new leadership here at Walt Disney World. You know, at the time it was Chapek. Now we've moved on from that. And while that may have meant some changes away from the not so great way of running things that Chapek had, there have been a lot of things that haven't necessarily changed in a positive way since we've gone back to Iger. But all that having been said, you know, I don't think it's out of the question that the seas could end up going the way of, let's say, the universe of energy, you know, being removed and transformed into a major attraction that features IP as opposed to kind of staying with the original edutainment theme of EPCOT. To that same point, it's hardly out of the question that the rumor of a phase 2 for EPCOT's reimagining could have been canned. You know, times have changed, we've got new leadership now, so who's to say? Still, I do think it's interesting. And as someone who's been following this stuff for as long as I have been, it's so close to the pattern that we've seen before that I can't help but recognize it. And I can't help but wonder if, you know, 2, 3, 5 years from now, because that's how long these things take. You know, it doesn't happen overnight. I can't help but wonder if we're going to be asking ourselves how we didn't see this coming, you know, how we didn't see the seas being removed as something that was even possible. But anyway, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts about what's going on at the seas over at EPCOT right now? Do you think that this is a sign that we're going down the same road that we've gone down many times before? Or are you hoping, like me, that this is just kind of connecting dots that aren't really there? I'd also like to know if you've ever noticed this pattern before. You know, I know that there are a lot of us out there who follow Disney. We update you guys on news and information, and we tend to see things in a way that more casual visitors might not. So I want to know if this is something that you've picked up on over the years, or if changes to things like Muppets and Tom Sawyer Island, if they've kind of been sprung on you. So tell me in a comment down below. Of course, I'd love to hear what you have to say, because this is a discussion and these topics are always interesting ones, because we really don't know what to expect, and it might be years before we do. So, you know, fire away. But yeah, once again, as a little bit of a reminder, I do have links in the description down below to some of our previous videos about the updates happening here at Walt Disney World, including Magic Kingdom as well as Animal Kingdom, and I'll have that article linked in the description as well. But for now, I'm off. Thanks so much for hanging out with me and traveling down this rabbit hole, and I hope you have a great day wherever it is you are. Until next time, bye.